This is the trade-off of having children welcoming space, right? And I'll trade it all day, every day. If I have to talk over some Legos for a little while. Mark, hit the slide. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm just going to ignore it. It'll be fine. Okay, so now we're going to pray again really loudly. You don't have to repeat after me. Like the kids do. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of your word, for these wonderful young people, and for the opportunity to learn from your word. Now, oh God, as we seek to interpret your word, we ask your blessing. Guide and direct our hearts and minds, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together might be acceptable in your sight.
There we go.
For you are our rock and our redeemer.
Hey, Marlo, I have... What is that?
Zachary. Without talking to you. My turn. At this point, I got to turn the switch. So we read in the letter to Hebrews what was arguably the beginning of the end of the letter. I know you all had your Bibles out, and that's great, but for the handful that didn't, the 13th chapter is the last chapter of the letter to the Hebrews. And this letter was meant to be kind of a secondary gospel targeted directly at Hebrew people. This is the only major, it's not a geographic letter, it's not a letter to an individual, it stands differently. And it stands so differently that its authorship is vague. What does that mean, Rick? Well, the New Testament scholars that work on authorship do something that I find mind-numbing and difficult. You know what, Alan? I'll take care of those. Let's call that done.
I can't do that.
It's starting to get to me. They count words. There are people that sit in their offices in seminaries around the world and count how many times different letters use different words and phrases. Exciting, huh? Doesn't that sound like a great job? Oh, and by the way, it matters how they spell it and what the nature of the word is, because they want to see if this is indicative of certain authorship. Because we've talked about this before, that in New Testament times, it was not uncommon to write in someone else's name. Today, we would call that some type of fraud, right? Representing that the words we're creating are someone else's words. But in that time, maybe you were a student of Paul's, so you wrote in Paul's name. Or maybe you were a follower of Luke, so you just went ahead and wrote in Luke's name. And it was common. So I guess I can blame this sermon on Joey Jeter, right? Because I was a student of Joey's, and therefore I'm not accountable for what I say to you. It's Joey. I'll just put it in his name. That was kind of the essence of how things were done. And so, with the letter to the Hebrews, what we are fairly certain of is it's not consistent with the phraseology or word choice of Paul. Okay? So, automatically, it's attributed somewhere else. And the fact that it is non-geographic specific leads us also to say that's not really like what Paul did, right? He wrote to individual cities or individual people more often than not. I don't have a great solution for you. I don't know where it came from. Does that make it less valid? This is where you say no. Who said no? Thanks, Sue. No, it doesn't. It makes it every bit as valid because it goes to the core of the message of faith. And what the letter to the Hebrews is trying to say is, here is Christianity, and here's some so what about that. And so we get to this end of Hebrews, and it talks about being loving and being kind, protecting marriage, being generous. it talks about striving to be, without using the direct words, more Christ-like. There's an interesting phrase in this 13th chapter, in those first 6 verses. I'm sure you picked up on it. Avoid the love of money. Now, it doesn't go on to say what Paul said about the love of money being the root of all kinds of evil. Why did I emphasize all kinds? Bill, why did I emphasize all kinds? That's right, because the common phrase, he said it very quietly, because the common phrase is the love of money is the root of all evil, right? No, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That little word makes a difference in the phrase, right? And we've taken that quote completely out of context. And we do that a lot with Scripture, people, as a whole. I'm not pointing at any one individual on this one. We think we know what that Scripture says, but we don't always know exactly what it says. Now, those of you who have been with me a while are acutely saying to yourselves, I can see it. You're saying, but Rick, you've already told us that we don't necessarily have a full copy of Scripture, right? So of course we don't know what Scripture says. For those of you who I've known a while, I'm going to ask you a question. Here, we'll do it the easy way. Do you feel like you know that, this is my wife Sarah, for those that are new here. Do you feel like you know me well enough to go, yeah, that doesn't sound like something Rick would say? Yes. Because you've been in relationship, you know that history. There's a lot of you in this room that at this point would be likely to say, that was dangerous. You could have said, no, I'm not so sure. There's a lot of people in this room that say, yeah, that didn't sound like Rick to me. We've been together, what, a year and a half, basically, not quite. And so you kind of get my pattern, my cadences. Most of you know when I ask a question, I'm actually looking for an answer, right? So those patterns are getting established. And in the case of this one, where the talk of money, it's interesting because it is close to Paul's phrase, and yet it's not Paul's phrase. Which means one of them informed the other most likely, right? When I start quoting people, it's because their words informed me and shaped what it is I want to say. And what I want to say today is that interesting phrase. Let's go back to it. I want to visit it with precision. Fortunately, I have it carefully marked. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. That's the end of the sentence. Now, again, you know that we didn't start with punctuation, we didn't start with paragraphs, we didn't start with some of those things. But what we have now is a phrase that says to us, maybe our love for, and I'm going to take it beyond money for a minute and say, our assets, our time, our talent, our abilities, and keeping those for ourselves is a little too much. The end of this letter to the Hebrews, talking about ways to become Christ-like, I think is urging the Hebrews to strive to be not perfect, not Jesus, but to be generous. To be generous with your love. To be generous with your willingness to serve others. To be generous, yes, with your gifts, but in the midst of that, to be willing to say, how can I manage me in such a way that I can be generous? Oh God, now he's gone from preaching to meddling. I hope your warriors still so choose. It's not going to get better from here. We are called by Christ, and it is echoed in this message from the Epistle to the Hebrews, that we are called to be messengers of God's love, and that message comes through us being willing to be generous not only with our time, not only with our talent, not only with our giving, but most importantly, with our grace and forgiveness. Ruh-roh. I've been singing, I pick on a lot of you to single out. Today I'm going to focus on Sarah, so I'm not as dangerous. You are called to understand I am flawed and love me anyway. Don't laugh. You know that every day. Okay, fine. Angie, you are called by God to understand I'm not perfect and love me anyway. And you know what? I'm called to do the same for you and everyone. Whether I really know you or not, God calls us through Jesus to extend grace, to extend forgiveness before we know we need it, to extend the opportunity to say, you are perfectly made, loved by God, and loved by me. The writer of Hebrews is not giving us a lecture or a list of rules to follow. The writer of Hebrews is giving us a reminder at the end to say, strive for the best or greatest good you can be. Strive to be generous. Strive to be loving. Strive to be, God forbid, happy. Sometimes I don't have anything to give. Heck, I got hit up this morning. Now, those who know me know that this preaching machine runs on 2 donuts and a large coffee. And every Sunday morning for the last 23 years, I have gotten up and I've bought 2 donuts. Here's how superstitious I am. A chocolate frosted and a maple frosted. Every week, not necessarily from the same place, but that is the rule.
Which one do you eat first?
What's that?
Which one do you eat first?
Oh, that changes. Thanks for asking that. Which one I eat first is literally the one that comes out of the bag first. It's not that ritualistic. And every once in a while there have been days where they didn't have one or the other, and then you have to figure out a new one. One day they tried to substitute an eclair. I was like, no, this is just not going to work. It's not going to be a good day. But today was a correct day in that regard. 1 chocolate, 1 maple, my cup of coffee. And so I could be a highly sugar-driven, caffeinated individual ready to give as much energy as I can to you. And in the midst of that, I believe I am representing that call to be generous. I could be one of these that tells you the exact same words, that doesn't stop for the jokes to come to mind in between. And you would get the content. But that's not who I'm called to be. Can you imagine me that way? Sandy, can you imagine that? I can't imagine that. I hope you can't imagine that, because this is not who I am. That's not how it works around here. I try to give you what I can to hopefully encourage you for a week ahead. And so we come full circle because it's the same message for you. The week ahead is calling you to be generous. You are called to strive to be generous. Now, ask me how. Never ask me how. I don't know. It's going to be different for every one of you. But God is calling you to share yourself, your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength with the love of Jesus Christ. And how that's going to meet you and what that opportunity is going to be, I don't know. When I stopped for my donut this morning, they asked me for $1 to help feed some kids. And you know what? I had exact change only. I literally took $1 off my son's stack of change to make sure I had enough to pay for my 2 donuts and coffee so that I could give you the energy I'm supposed to give you. There was nothing left. All I had was a smile and encouraging word. And sometimes that's enough. It's not going to feed a child in that program. I don't even know what that program is. Honestly, I'd want to do some research first. Make sure that half the money didn't just go to some corporation. But sometimes there's plenty. And so I give. My apologies for the number of people who are encountering us for the first time today, because we just launched our fall stewardship campaign, and I hate it when the church talks about money and it's the first time someone's here, because trust me, we don't on a regular basis. Striving to be generous means setting ourselves up for the opportunity to give of ourselves in whatever way we can. And yes, that includes saying, I don't love money so much that I can't set aside for the opportunity to be generous. This is a generous church. I've been lecturing Marv. Marv's tired of hearing it. Where is he today? There he is. He's tired of me saying, we don't track what we bring in or what we give out when we hand out 550 backpacks and lunches and prizes every year at the back to school fair. Oh, and all those school supplies in them. And I keep saying to him, like he crossed his arms and leaned back. You've got to find a way to track those numbers because it's a part of our story. We don't track all of the time we spend in prayer. We don't track all of the time we spend serving others in meaningful ways. I've never asked for a report from the cooks for their involvement at the PFLAG chapter. I don't know how many hours. I know it's a lot of hours, but I've never asked for them. I don't get a report from Alan for all the time he spends at Fish every single week helping feed people. I don't get a report from Dick talking about how he works with the Arboretum and gives away his master gardening skills. I could go on with most of you. You all have these stories of things you are doing beyond yourself. And the writer of Hebrews in Jesus Christ says, strive to be that kind of generous. Oh, birthday girl. I don't get a report on how much time you give beyond what you're paid for, caring for people that need care. It's her birthday. I don't get a report from Daphne on how much time she spends in sending encouraging text messages.
Did you really?
I really did, because I look forward to them every darn day. I get upset when they don't come in on time. No pressure. I'd be sad if I missed one. We don't ask Dixie for how much time she spends at Second Chance. I know, but we don't get a report. My point is, you are a generous, generous people. And yet Christ calls you to continue to strive to be generous. It may be a simple hug or a smile or the unlocking of a stuck locker. That's the beauty of not having it all written down on paper. I can add from what kids can. Whatever it is, strive to be what Christ has called you to be through the words of the writers of Hebrews. And may God be blessed. Amen.